Flight 447's pilot collapsed unconscious at 38,000 feet, and 180 passengers' lives hung in the balance. The flight attendants were in panic, emergency alarms were blaring, and the co-pilot was frozen with terror as the Boeing 737 began losing altitude. Multiple system failures, engine problems, and only minutes before potential disaster. That's when Rebecca Thompson, the quiet librarian sitting in seat 32C, stood up and walked toward the cockpit. "I can land this plane," she said calmly. No one knew she had been an F-16 fighter pilot for 12 years, with 347 combat missions, and a legendary call sign that struck fear into enemy forces. In the next 18 minutes, the woman who had hidden behind books for a decade would need every ounce of her military training to bring 180 souls safely home. Rebecca Thompson had been working at Boston Public Library for 10 years. At 38, she was known as the quietest employee in the building. Medium height, auburn hair always pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing modest cardigans and comfortable flats. She organized books, helped visitors find resources, and spoke only when necessary. "Rebecca's like a ghost," her colleague Jennifer Adams would joke. "You never hear her coming, but somehow every book finds its perfect place." Rebecca's daily routine never varied. Arrive at 8 a.m., organize the returned books, help patrons with research, catalog new arrivals, leave at 5 p.m. She ate lunch alone, reading aviation magazines that she quickly hid when anyone approached. The other librarians found her pleasant but distant. Never joined after-work drinks, never shared personal stories, never mentioned family or relationships. When asked about her past, she'd simply say, "I've always loved books." Head librarian Margaret Chen appreciated Rebecca's efficiency but was curious about her background. "Rebecca, you have an interesting way of organizing our military history section. Very precise." "I like order," Rebecca would respond, avoiding eye contact. What Margaret noticed but never questioned was Rebecca's unusual knowledge. When veterans came looking for technical manuals or military history, Rebecca could guide them to exactly what they needed. She knew aircraft specifications, military terminology, and flight procedures with startling accuracy. "For someone who's always been a librarian, you sure know a lot about planes," veteran patron Robert Williams had commented once. Rebecca had smiled weakly. "I read a lot." The truth was that Rebecca Thompson had never been just a librarian. For 12 years, she had been Captain Rebecca Phoenix Thompson, one of the Air Force's most decorated F-16 pilots. From 2008 to 2020, she had flown 347 combat missions over Afghanistan and Iraq. She held the record for precision strikes and had saved countless ground troops with her flying skills. Her call sign Phoenix came from her ability to bring damaged aircraft home safely when others would have ejected. But in 2020, everything changed. During a routine mission, her wingman Lieutenant Casey Rodriguez was shot down. Rebecca watched helplessly as her closest friend died in the explosion below. The survivor's guilt, the PTSD, the weight of all those combat missions finally broke her. She left the Air Force with full honors but emotionally shattered. Flying had been her life, but now the sight of aircraft brought panic attacks. She needed complete separation from everything military. Boston Public Library offered exactly what she needed: silence, books, and a world away from jet engines and combat missions. For 10 years, she successfully buried Captain Phoenix Thompson and became quiet librarian Rebecca. She lived in a small apartment near the library, rode the subway, lived a deliberately ordinary life. No one knew about the combat medals in her closet, or the flight simulator she'd use late at night to stay current, just in case. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Rebecca was flying to Chicago for a library conference, her first time on a commercial aircraft in 3 years. She'd chosen seat 32C, an aisle seat near the back, where she could avoid looking out the windows. American Airlines Flight 447 was a Boeing 737 with 180 passengers and 6 crew members. Captain James Harrison, 54, had 23 years of flying experience. First Officer Linda Parker, 31, was relatively new but well-trained. Rebecca kept her head down, reading a library science journal. The takeoff from Logan Airport was smooth, and they reached cruising altitude of 38,000 feet without incident. At 10:47 a.m., everything changed. A loud bang echoed through the cabin. The plane shuddered violently. Passengers screamed as the aircraft tilted sharply to the right. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain," came Harrison's strained voice. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain calm," and the announcement cut off. Flight attendant Maria Santos grabbed the intercom. "We need any passenger with medical training to come forward immediately. The captain has collapsed." Rebecca's heart started racing, but not from fear. Her pilot instincts, dormant for years, suddenly activated. She could feel the aircraft's abnormal movements, hear the engine irregularities, sense the crew's panic. A retired doctor named Paul Chen made his way to the cockpit. 5 minutes later he emerged with devastating news. "Captain Harrison has suffered a massive heart attack. He's unconscious and unresponsive." Panic spread through the cabin. Parents held their children. People were crying, praying, calling loved ones on their phones. Maria Santos tried to maintain calm. First Officer Parker is fully capable of handling this situation. But Rebecca could hear the fear in her voice, and from her seat, she could see into the cockpit. First Officer Parker was clearly overwhelmed, frantically pushing buttons and speaking rapidly into her headset. At 10:52 a.m., the situation deteriorated further. The plane hit severe turbulence, and even Rebecca could tell they were losing altitude. The engine noise was all wrong. She recognized the sound of a failing turbine. First Officer Parker's voice came over the intercom, barely controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have multiple system failures. We're declaring an emergency and attempting to reach the nearest airport." That's when Rebecca made the decision that would change everything. She unbuckled her seatbelt and walked toward the front of the plane. Passengers stared at the quiet librarian moving with sudden purpose and confidence. "Excuse me," she said to Maria Santos. "I need to speak with your first officer." "Ma'am, please return to your seat. This is an emergency situation." "That's exactly why I need to help. I'm Captain Rebecca Thompson, United States Air Force. I can fly this aircraft." Maria's eyes went wide. You're a pilot, fighter pilot, 12 years, F-16. "I can land this plane." The transformation was immediate and startling. Gone was the shy librarian. Rebecca's posture changed, her voice carried authority, her movements became precise and purposeful. She was Captain Phoenix Thompson again. Rebecca entered the cockpit to find chaos. Captain Harrison was unconscious, connected to an oxygen tank. First Officer Parker was near panic, dealing with multiple warning alarms and emergency checklists. "Officer Parker, I'm Captain Rebecca Thompson, Air Force. What's our situation?" Linda Parker looked up, tears in her eyes. "Engine 2 is failing. We've lost hydraulics in the primary system, and I don't know if I can handle this." Rebecca quickly scanned the instrument panel. Her years of flight training kicked in immediately. "Okay, Linda, you're doing fine. I'm here to help. What's our altitude and heading?" 32,000 feet, descending. Logan Airport is 47 miles northeast. Rebecca's mind calculated rapidly. Boeing 737 specifications, glide ratio, wind conditions, approach procedures. It was different from an F-16, but the fundamentals were the same. "Linda, I need you to contact air traffic control. Tell them we have an experienced military pilot assisting. Request priority landing at Logan, runway 4R. You really know how to fly this. Trust me." For the next 18 minutes, Captain Phoenix Thompson returned from a 10-year retirement. She worked with First Officer Parker to stabilize the aircraft, manage the failing engine, and execute a controlled descent. The cockpit was intense but organized. Rebecca's combat experience had taught her to stay calm under extreme pressure. She talked Linda through each procedure while monitoring systems and coordinating with air traffic control. "Boston approach, this is Flight 447. We have an assisting pilot aboard with extensive military flight experience. Requesting vectors for emergency approach to runway 4R. Flight 447 Roger. Military pilot, what's your experience level?" 12 years Air Force, F-16 pilot, 347 combat missions. "I can bring this bird home." "Copy that. You're cleared for approach, emergency vehicles standing by." In the cabin, passengers could sense something had changed. The plane's movements became more controlled, more purposeful. Flight attendant Maria Santos made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an experienced military pilot assisting our crew. Please prepare for emergency landing procedures. Rebecca worked the controls with the precision that had made her legendary in the Air Force. Every adjustment was calculated. Every decision was based on years of experience flying in the most dangerous conditions. Linda, I need you to handle the communications while I focus on the approach. We're going to make a single-engine landing with partial hydraulics. Is that possible? I've landed F-16s with worse damage. This is just a bigger plane. At 11:23 a.m., Flight 447 touched down at Logan Airport. The landing was firm but controlled, exactly what you'd expect from a combat pilot used to aircraft carrier landings and damaged aircraft recoveries. Emergency vehicles raced alongside the plane as Rebecca brought it to a complete stop on the runway. The cabin erupted in cheers and applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca announced over the intercom, "welcome to Boston. Please remain seated while emergency crews conduct their safety checks." The airport was swarming with activity. Fire trucks, ambulances, news crews and airline officials surrounded the aircraft. Captain Harrison was rushed to Mass General Hospital, where he would make a full recovery. As passengers disembarked, many stopped to thank Rebecca, but she had already changed back into her quiet librarian persona, deflecting praise and trying to disappear into the crowd. News of the heroic landing spread quickly. Within hours, "Librarian saves 180 lives" was trending on social media. The story had everything: a hidden hero, dramatic rescue, and the shocking revelation of Rebecca's military background. Boston Public Library was overwhelmed with reporters. Margaret Chen was stunned. Rebecca never mentioned being in the military. "She's worked here for 10 years, and we had no idea." The Air Force Public Affairs Office confirmed Rebecca's record. Captain Rebecca Phoenix, Thompson, Distinguished Service, Combat Veteran, exemplary record. But Rebecca had vanished. She didn't return to the library, didn't answer her phone, and avoided all media requests. 3 days after the landing, Rebecca was found at a small cafe near Boston Harbor, staring out at the water. Air Force Colonel Michael Torres, her former commanding officer, had tracked her down. "Phoenix," he said, using her old call sign, "you can't hide from this." "I'm not hiding. I'm just processing. You saved 180 lives. You're a hero." Rebecca sighed. "Mike, I left flying for a reason. I wanted a quiet life, but you came back when people needed you. That's what real pilots do. I don't know if I can handle being Captain Thompson again. The expectations, the pressure." "Then don't be Captain Thompson. Be Rebecca Thompson, the librarian who happens to be an incredible pilot." 6 months later, Rebecca had found her new purpose. She returned to Boston Public Library part-time, but also began working with the FAA's Flight Safety Program, training commercial pilots in emergency procedures. She developed a unique program combining her military experience with civilian aviation safety. Her sessions on crisis management and emergency landing procedures became legendary in the aviation community. "What I learned in combat," she would tell her students, "is that the most important skill isn't flying the plane perfectly. It's staying calm when everything goes wrong." Rebecca also began working with veteran organizations, helping former military pilots transition to civilian careers. She understood the struggle of leaving military life and finding new purpose. 1 year after Flight 447, Rebecca was invited to speak at the Air Force Academy. Standing before a new generation of pilots, she shared her story. "For 10 years I thought I had left flying behind," she told the cadets. "I thought being Captain Phoenix Thompson was over. But that day taught me that who you are never really leaves you. It just waits for the moment, when people need it most." After her speech, a young cadet asked, "Ma'am, do you regret leaving the Air Force?" Rebecca smiled. "I regret nothing. Every experience, the combat missions, the quiet years in the library, Flight 447, they all led me to where I am now. Sometimes we need to step away from who we were to become who we're meant to be." Today, Rebecca Thompson continues working at Boston Public Library, 3 days a week. The other 2 days, she's at the FAA Training Center or speaking to aviation groups. Her office at the library displays both her library science degree and her Air Force commendations. Passengers from Flight 447 still send her thank you cards. First Officer Linda Parker, now a captain herself, credits Rebecca with saving her career and her confidence. She showed me that being a pilot isn't about never facing emergencies, Linda says. It's about having the skills and courage to handle them when they come. Rebecca's story reminds us that heroism often comes from unexpected places. Sometimes the quiet person next to you has the exact skills needed to save the day. And sometimes, the career you left behind becomes the foundation for the life you're meant to live. The call sign Phoenix turned out to be prophetic. Sometimes, to save others, we must rise from the ashes of who we used to be. This story was brought to you by Hidden Hero Stories. If you know someone who carries extraordinary skills in ordinary places, share their story in the comments. Subscribe to honor those who serve others, whether in uniform or in cardigans, and help keep these incredible stories alive.